Greetings, my name is Daniel Burton, and this is my Extreme Makeover presentation. Here's the table of contents for this presentation. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss miscommunications, give an example of miscommunication, discuss the elements of the example of miscommunication, and make recommendations of how the example could have been better handled. I will also be discussing common complaints that nurses have about the facility, like staffing, scheduling, and workload. We will then look at the power of talking, listening, and innovation, and how these things can be used to make a positive impact in the work environment. This is my example of miscommunication in the workplace called to remove the Foley or to not remove the Foley. That is the question. It was about 5:30 in the morning and my shift was coming to an end. I had reviewed my orders on my patients who had an abdominal incision the previous day before the procedure. I had an order to remove the Foley catheter post-op day 1 at 0600. I entered the room to remove the catheter, and I explained to the patient what we were about to do and what to expect. After I removed the catheter, I was preparing to leave the room. I asked the patient if they needed anything before I left. They explained to me that their incision site felt warm. The incision site was warm to touch, but there was no swelling or pain. I sought out the opinion of another, more experienced nurse because I had never encountered this before. I suggested calling the doctor, and they agreed. So I called our paging service to notify the vascular surgeon that performed the procedure. The nurse who assisted me called him back asking to explain the situation. She agreed that it sounded odd and she was going to inform the doctor. She immediately called me back in a concerned voice and asked me if I had removed the Foley. I said yes. I did because I had an order to do so. She told me that the order was supposed to be removed from the order set and the doctor was not going to be happy. I asked why it was important to keep the catheter in. She explained to me that the procedure is close to the renal artery and they like to keep the catheter in to make sure the renal artery was not affected during the procedure. She apologized and explained to me that she was supposed to remove the order from the order set. She then asked me to replace the catheter if I could before the doctor arrived. By this time it was shift change. I stayed over to replace the catheter so the next nurse would not have to take the fall for what I did. As I was about to replace the catheter, the doctor walked up behind me. I tried to explain what happened before we walked in, but he ignored me and proceeded into the room. He assessed the incision site and explained that everything looked fine. He asked me how the output was last night. I told him the patient had great output. He then looked down to inspect the Foley and noticed there was not one in place. He became infuriated with me for removing it without an order. I tried to explain to him that I had an order that told me to remove post-op day 1 at 0600. He kept interrupting me and telling me there was no order for that and stormed out of the room before I could show him the order. So what happened? Three main things happened in this example. The first thing was that I was new and I had never cared for this doctor's patient, so I didn't know his preferences. Secondly, the order should have been removed from the order set by the nurse or the doctor. They were both aware the order set included this and it needed to be removed. This may have resulted from a long day or other external factors. Lastly, unprofessional behavior on the doctor's part. Instead of reviewing the order with me in private, he confronted me in front of the patient and assumed the order was not there. Themes of conversation. Some of the recurring themes I've noticed during lunch conversations are too many inexperienced nurses, not enough heart nurses, the workload's too heavy, and complaints about having to staff other units. Our unit recently hired 13 new nurses. This helped with staffing issue, but has also created a knowledge and experience gap. In our unit, you must have experience to be a heart nurse and go through certification. Because we have so many new nurses and turnover rates are high, this has left us with few heart nurses. The heart nurses have been having to work 4 or 5 days a week. Most of the open heart patients are one-on-one depending on the time the procedure was finished and the condition of the patient. Even after the patient no longer meets one-on-one qualification, they still have a high workload. Our heart nurses having to take more than one heart patient at a time creates a great deal of stress. Because our unit has been better staffed, some of our non-heart nurses, because heart nurses cannot be pulled to other units, have been being pulled to the floor in overflow units. Some of the nurses do not like this because they have a higher patient load than they are used to, or they claim this is not what I signed up for. As a result, the culture portrayed is one that is overworked, overloaded, and frustrated. So the organization as a conversation is broken down into patterns of meaning and patterns of relating. Patterns of meaning are themes that shape an organization, like its mission statement, vision, values. Patterns of learning focus on interaction and culture. Our organization relates by the use of quarterly town hall meetings led by our CEO and quarterly staff meetings led by our unit's director. If individual issues arise, they are generally handled with a face-to-face meeting with the unit director. Relational leading focuses on aspects like collaboration, empowerment, dialogue, horizontal decision-making, shaping, distribution, networking, and continuous learning and connectivity. Essentially, this is a leader who is in the moment, focused on the here and now. They empower others to build relationships through collaboration, dialogue, networking, sharing, and connectivity. My organization's mission statement is, above all else, we are committed to the care and improvement of human life. In recognition of this commitment, we will provide exceptional health care to our expanding communities with compassion, integrity, pursuing excellence in all we do. Helping, healing, giving hope. Our vision statement is, as a nationally recognized tertiary provider of the largest healthcare system in Northwest Georgia, Redmond will support and engage our medical staff, expand and modernize our facilities, grow our primary care, occupational health, and EMS networks, and enhance our community presence. We will promote staff development and deliver exceptional patient care every time. Our reputation for success will be recognized through service line growth, increased market share, exceptional clinical outcomes, and superior patient, physician, and employee satisfaction. We are Redmond. Lastly, our values are: customer is always right, actions speak louder than words, respect the golden rule, and excellence is our standard. Collectively, these things answer the question why we are here, what we're going to accomplish, and how we're going to do it. Every conversation, whether it be a group or an individual, is an opportunity for improvement and reinforcement of values. It can also serve as an opportunity for change and development. It's important that a leader keep in mind that everyone is different and for that reason must be approached differently. Therefore, sometimes we must speak their language and make it meaningful to the individual. We must also consider cultural preferences. A conversation is not one-sided. It consists of talking and listening, and not always in that order. Really listen to what someone has to say, don't just hear it. Listening is an important part in establishing a trusting relationship. Be present in the conversation, stop what you're doing, and do not multitask. Listening goes beyond words. It consists of cues such as facial expressions and hand movements. For example, a nonverbal cue that we tend to have is the look of exhaustion. Innovation. Both and thinking enables innovation. The both statement recognizes the value of holding multiple perspectives as useful and viable, and represents the yet to be formed ideas and creates innovation. Miscommunication actually tends to direct us to seek answers and new styles of approaching a situation, and creates an opportunity for innovation. Changing the story. Talking and listening are two very basic concepts that can have a huge impact. It is important to clearly and effectively communicate what we have to say. We need to view every conversation as an opportunity for understanding and improvement. On the other hand, we need to be effective listeners as well. Be present in the moment and focus on what's being said and why it's being said. Don't just say I'm listening to say that you did. If we cannot communicate, then we cannot improve. Communication demonstrates mutual respect and is a great way to build trust. Speak to them the same way you would do if they were not around. Show compassion for their individuality. Everyone is different and has different set of needs. Provide stability through lifting those up around you. Praise them for their accomplishments. And lastly, create hope in an organization. Capture key points, reinforce goals and purpose, and end every session on a good note. So now it's time to reflect and rewrite the story on maybe a way that it could have been better handled. It was about 5:30 in the morning and my shift was coming to an end. I had reviewed my orders on my patients who had an abdominal incision the previous day before the procedure. I had an order to remove the Foley catheter post-op day 1 at 0600. I entered the room to remove the catheter. I explained to the patient what we were about to do and what to expect. After I removed the catheter, I was preparing to leave the room. I asked the patient if they needed anything before I left. They explained to me their incision site felt warm, and the incision site was warm to touch, but there was no swelling or pain. I sought out the opinion of a more experienced nurse because I had never encountered this before. I suggested calling the doctor, and they agreed. So I called our paging service to notify the vascular surgeon that had performed the procedure. The nurse who assisted me called him back, asking me to explain the situation. She agreed that it sounded odd, and she was going to inform the doctor. She immediately called me back in a concerned voice, asking me if I had removed the Foley. I said yes, I did. I had an order to do so. She told me that the order was supposed to be removed from the order set and the doctor was not going to be happy. I asked why this was important to keep the catheter in, and she explained to me that the procedure is close to the renal artery, and they like to keep the catheter in to make sure the renal artery was not affected during the procedure. She apologized and said she would call the doctor, explained that she forgot to remove the order, and we're in process of getting another catheter replaced. She then asked me to replace the catheter if I could before the doctor arrived. By this time it was shift change. I stayed to assist the oncoming nurse in replacing the catheter. As I was about to replace the catheter, the doctor walked up behind me. Before he went into the room, I explained to the doctor where the miscommunication occurred and why it occurred. He then entered the room and assessed the incision site and explained that everything looked fine. He asked me how the output was last night, and I told him the patient had great output. He then explained to the patient that he had forgot to remove the order from the order set, and we need to replace the catheter to ensure the kidneys were not affected during the surgery. We then stepped outside the room and we discussed the situation. He was understanding that I was new and informed me that his patients do not remove the catheter unless you have a verbal order to do so. Explaining what went wrong to the doctor is an example of talking and relating. Him informing me of why the catheter needs to stay in place is me listening. Me learning from the experience creates innovation from the misunderstanding, and me applying it to my practice makes it meaningful. It also helps to improve patient outcomes with that satisfies patterns of meaning. And this slide just provides a quick recap of the main points during this presentation. And this is a list of references used to create the PowerPoint. This concludes the presentation, and thank you for your time.